Relax, they were just old rings, my sister said, sliding an empty jewelry box across the table. I stared inside. Mom would have wanted cash anyway. Then my phone rang. My name is Rebecca Sloan, and I'm 38 years old. I spend my days organizing other people's happiest moments as a wedding planner, coordinating flowers, venues, and vows, while quietly carrying my own grief home every evening. When our mother passed away 8 months ago, I became the one who stayed. I handled the paperwork, managed the house, sorted through decades of memories nobody else wanted to touch. My younger sister Claire had always been the one the family celebrated. Relatives lit up around her confidence and her easy charm, assuming she was the responsible one simply because she spoke loudly and smiled wide. But it was me who drove Mom to her appointments. It was me who organized the insurance documents and answered the calls nobody else picked up. Our mother owned a small but deeply meaningful jewelry collection, pieces passed down through generations, each one carrying a name and a story attached to it. I stored everything carefully in the bedroom, believing our family would sit together one day and divide it with respect. Claire rarely came by the house. When she did, she acted like she was the one running everything. I stayed quiet through most of it, choosing peace over conflict, because I genuinely believed things would work themselves out eventually. I wasn't rich or glamorous, and I didn't have Claire's ability to fill a room with certainty, but I had something they didn't expect. If you've ever watched a sibling walk into a family situation and take over something they had no right to touch, you already know the specific kind of anger I'm describing. Quiet family members are dismissed constantly, talked over at dinners, left out of decisions, and then blamed for not speaking up sooner. Subscribe if you've ever been the one doing the actual work while someone else got the credit. Have relatives ever tried to claim belongings that weren't theirs after a loss? Drop your story in the comments because you are not alone in this. Click like or hit hype because what comes next is something I never saw coming either. I went to Mom's house on a Saturday morning to begin sorting her bedroom. The air inside still smelled faintly of her lavender lotion, the kind she kept on the nightstand for years. I moved through the room slowly, careful with every drawer, until I reached the wooden jewelry box on her dresser. I opened it and felt the floor shift beneath me. It was nearly empty, a few broken chains and a single earring without its pair. That was all. I stood there for a long moment, just staring, running my fingers along the velvet lining where her rings and brooches used to sit. I called Claire immediately. She answered on the second ring, completely calm. She told me she had sold several pieces to cover expenses after the funeral. Her voice carried no hesitation, no guilt, nothing. I asked her when that decision was made. She said she made it herself because someone had to be practical. I drove to her apartment that afternoon. She opened the door and leaned against the frame like I was there to waste her time. "You care more about dusty rings than reality," she said flatly. "Those weren't yours to sell," I told her. She rolled her eyes and said the jewelry was old and not particularly valuable anyway, that I was being sentimental over nothing. She walked back inside and left me standing in the doorway. I drove home with my hands tight on the steering wheel. Then, around 4 that afternoon, my phone rang. It was a man named Gerald, the owner of a pawn shop across town. He explained that someone had brought in several pieces of jewelry using paperwork that looked questionable. His shop had my contact information on file from an appraisal our mother had done years earlier. Then he told me something that stopped me cold. One of the items, he said, was a registered heirloom with traceable legal documentation. Selling it without proper estate authorization could constitute fraudulent ownership transfer. I sat in my car in the driveway and listened to every word he said. Claire's first move was financial, and it came dressed as sacrifice. She told relatives she had sold the jewelry to help cover funeral expenses, framing herself as a sibling who stepped up when it was hard. What she didn't mention was that Mom's life insurance had already covered those costs completely. I found the settlement paperwork in a folder I had organized myself 3 months earlier. The funeral was paid for, every cent of it. Claire had sold our mother's heirlooms and kept the money without telling a single person in our family. I felt something harden inside me when I confirmed that. Not anger, exactly. Something colder and more focused than anger. The humiliation came next at a Sunday dinner at our aunt's house. The smell of roast chicken filled the dining room as everyone settled around the table, comfortable and unsuspecting. Claire waited until the conversation slowed and then mentioned casually that I was making the estate process difficult by being, as she put it, obsessed with old trinkets. She said I was holding up financial decisions out of pure selfishness. She laughed as she said it, and 2 cousins laughed with her. Relatives nodded along because Claire delivered everything with the confidence of someone who had already decided she was right. Nobody asked me for my side. Nobody even glanced my way. I picked up my fork and said nothing because I had already decided arguing at that table was not how this was going to end. The third move was legal. Claire called me the following Tuesday and told me she needed me to sign a document granting her full authority over all remaining possessions in our mother's estate. She said it would simplify the process and speed everything along. She said refusing would create unnecessary delays and make me look obstructive to the rest of the family. I told her I needed time to review it. She pushed. I said no. I hung up the phone and sat quietly at my kitchen table for a long while, thinking about every conversation I had let slide, every decision I had accepted without pushing back. That night, I began researching the jewelry sale on my own. I remembered something important from years ago. Mom had shown me her jewelry box once, not just to show me the pieces, but to explain them. She had said, "These aren't just decorations, they're family history." She was not being poetic, she was being literal. I went back to the house and searched through a filing cabinet I knew she kept organized in the hallway closet. Inside, I found what I was looking for: appraisal records for each significant piece, handwritten ownership notes, and 2 official certificates for items that qualified as registered family heirlooms under state estate law. What they didn't know was Mom kept records of everything. Claire had sold items she had 0 legal authority to sell. The appraisal documents were dated, signed, and undeniable. I photographed every page and stored copies in 3 separate places. I contacted Gerald at the pawn shop again and asked him to hold all transaction records until I could speak with an attorney. I organized everything into a single folder, calm and methodical. I had a plan they never saw coming. My cousin Daniel had always been kept at the edges of family gatherings, labeled unreliable by relatives who found his honesty inconvenient. When I called him, he picked up immediately. I told him what Claire had done, and he went quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I've watched her do this to people before. I believe you completely." He helped me contact the pawn shop directly to request official transaction reports, the kind with signatures and item descriptions that could be used in a legal setting. Daniel had seen Claire manipulate situations for years and had never had anything concrete to bring forward. Now we did. Claire, meanwhile, was getting louder. She told our aunt she planned to sell the rest of Mom's belongings soon, that she had already identified a few buyers. She assumed my silence meant surrender. It didn't. Daniel kept telling me to wait, to stay quiet until the evidence was complete and impossible to argue with. Claire announced a family meeting to finalize estate decisions, expecting everyone to arrive and sign what she had already prepared. I marked the date on my calendar and kept organizing my folder. That meeting was exactly what I had been waiting for. The family lawyer's office was small and smelled of old paper and wood polish. Claire arrived first and sat at the head of the table with a stack of documents in front of her. She looked relaxed, prepared, certain. Relatives filtered in and settled into chairs, the sound of shuffling papers and quiet greetings filling the room before things went formal. The lawyer greeted everyone and asked who wanted to begin. Claire immediately started distributing signature pages for the authority transfer. I let her finish placing every sheet before I spoke. "Before we sign anything," I said, "I'd like the lawyer to review the jewelry sale first." Claire looked at me. "That's already handled." "It isn't," I said. I placed the pawn shop transaction reports on the table and slid the appraisal certificates beside them. The lawyer picked them up without a word and began reading. The room went very still. The only sound was the faint hum of the building's ventilation system and the soft turning of pages. Claire crossed her arms. "You're making a scene over junk." I looked directly at her. "You sold something that wasn't yours." The lawyer set the documents down and explained in clear and measured language that selling estate property without authorization from all legal heirs is a violation of estate law. He stated that 2 of the items Claire had sold were legally registered heirlooms, meaning the transactions were conducted under false ownership claims. He looked at Claire and said the sales would need to be reversed and the items returned to the estate immediately. The relatives who had laughed at Claire's jokes about dusty rings were no longer laughing. An aunt who had always spoken in Claire's defense leaned forward and asked a quiet question neither of us had ever heard her ask before. "Claire, is this true?" Claire's composure cracked in stages, like something under pressure that finally gives. She tried twice to redirect the conversation and couldn't finish either sentence. The lawyer noted everything. Daniel sat in the corner of the room and said nothing, but I felt him watching. Gerald cooperated fully. Within 2 weeks, every piece Claire had sold was returned to the estate. The pawn shop transactions were officially reversed, and the legal certificates were filed correctly under shared estate ownership. Claire received a formal warning from the lawyer and lost the trust of relatives who had defended her without question for years. People who had spoken over me at family dinners began asking for my opinion before making decisions. I took responsibility for managing Mom's belongings carefully, storing each piece the way she would have wanted, with documentation attached and a plan for dividing things fairly when the time was right. I thought about how long I had stayed quiet, believing that keeping peace was the same thing as being respected. It wasn't. They always trusted the loudest voice in the room. In the end, the truth belonged to the one who kept the records. Have relatives ever taken something sentimental from your family after a loss? Maybe a sibling helped themselves to items that belonged to everyone, assuming nobody would push back. Share your story in the comments because someone reading right now is going through the exact same thing and needs to know they aren't alone. Subscribe for stories about people who protect what matters when family tries to take it. Tell me what happened in your family below. Click hype to help this story reach the people who need it most. Standing up for yourself is tough, especially when the people challenging you are the ones you grew up trusting. If you've been there, subscribe and become part of our community. Let me know this story helped by clicking hype and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel.